Picture this. You're standing on a dark, wind-swept steppe in Central Asia. The howling wind is sweeping across the plains, pretty much exactly as it did over 1,000 years ago. Out there in the vastness, these massive stone monuments, stelae, stand totally defiant against time. But these aren't just grave markers. They hold a message. It's a desperate prophecy carved in ancient runes, left behind by the rulers of a massive, long-forgotten empire. Long before Genghis Khan conquered the world, and centuries before the Ottoman Empire was even a thought, there was the first Turkic Empire. Welcome to our explainer. Today we're unpacking the rise, the crushing fall, and the haunting final words of a civilization that forged an identity right out of the harsh steppes.
My Turkic people, listen. If you forget your Khagans, you will fall. Those words carved by Bilge Khagan in 735 CE, well, they weren't just some standard political rhetoric. They were a frantic warning to future generations. I mean, this civilization experienced intense trauma, absolute glory, and a very real, lingering terror of total collapse. But who exactly were these people? And why did their ultimate leader feel the need to carve this desperate plea into literal stone?
Section 1. Rise of the First Empire.
Okay, let's dive into this and flash back to the very origins of this monumental empire. We really have to understand how this massive state sprang into existence in the 6th century to grasp the sheer weight of that warning. So consider the word Turk. Before this empire, nomadic groups on the steppes were just known by specific tribal names like the Ashina or the TL, or, they were given exonyms by the Chinese like Tujue. But this empire, the Gök Turks, they did something entirely revolutionary. This was the very first time the word Turk was used to forge a unified political state identity. It wasn't just about bloodlines anymore, right? It was about belonging to a singular, powerful nation. In fact, this is the very first time the word appears anywhere in the historical record, showing up in Byzantine diplomatic letters. They were literally putting themselves on the global map.
Now, the rise of this empire was incredibly volatile. Just look at the rapid pace here. In 552 CE, a leader named Bilge Khagan rebels against the ruling Orkhon Khaganate. And he doesn't just win, he completely shatters the old order and establishes a massive new empire. But, as we know, the steppe is unforgiving. By 581 CE, internal wars are already fracturing the state. And then, by 630 CE, Tang China utterly destroys the eastern Gök Turks. It really seems like the end of the story, right? But then, out of nowhere in 682 CE, a leader named Iltutmish miraculously revives the state. It's just a breathtaking roller coaster of rapid expansion, sudden collapse, and stubborn rebirth.
And this brilliantly illustrates how this massive territory was actually managed, and ultimately, why it became so vulnerable. We really have to look at its structure. It was absolutely crucial for controlling the lucrative Silk Road trade routes, so the empire was split into two halves. On the left, we have the East, based in Mongolia, governed under Buman's royal line. And on the right, the West, stretching all the way to the Black Sea, governed under his brother Istami. Now, it was a super pragmatic way to manage trade and military defense. But dividing power like this, well, it almost always sows the seeds for future rivalries.
Section 2. The Fracture and the Chinese Interlude. So that dual system could really only hold for so long before personal ambition and external pressures just cracked it wide open. The Tang Dynasty in China, specifically under Emperor Taizong, was watching this fractured empire very, very closely. Their geopolitical strategy was incredibly effective, and it's perfectly summarized by this quote from the Chinese annals. "These barbarians cannot be trusted. Divide them." Tang China didn't even need to just use brute force. They exploited the internal wars and rivalries between the eastern and western factions of the Gök Turks. By 630 CE, this strategy of division and conquest completely brought the eastern Gök Turks to their knees. The first iteration of the empire was totally crushed.
Section 3. The Second Chance, Revival, and the Orkhon inscriptions.
But as we saw earlier, the story actually doesn't end in the ashes of 630 CE. Half a century later, against literally all odds, the Gök Turks fought their way back into history to form the triumphant Second Khaganate. To really understand this Second Golden Age, you've got to know the main cast of characters here. Honestly, they're like figures straight out of a Shakespearean tragedy. In the first column, we have Bilge Khagan. He's the ruler, bearing the weight of the entire state on his shoulders. In the middle is his brother, Kultigin. This guy was the ultimate general, surviving a staggering 47 battles to keep the empire alive. And over on the right, Tonyukyuk, the wise elder and statesman who served as the strategic mastermind. Together, this trio basically held back the forces of chaos.
Now, what's really interesting about this is how we even know so much about their internal struggles in the first place. Following the death of the great general Gök Türk Khagan in 731 and right before Bilge Khagan himself died, they commissioned the Orkhon inscriptions between 732 and 735 CE. These aren't just dry, dusty historical chronicles. No way. These are the oldest written Turkic texts in existence, utilizing a really striking Old Turkic runic script. They are deeply personal, first-person eulogies and intense political manifestos. You read them and they are just filled with the trauma of their past subjugation, the glory of their independence, and this profound, lingering fear of another collapse. Just listen to the immense cinematic scale of their worldview here. Translating the Old Turkic runes to English, the stone reads, "When the blue sky above and the brown earth below were created, between them a human was created. Over my human descendants, my ancestors, Buman and Astemi, became Khagans." They viewed their rule not just as some temporary political reality, but literally as a cosmic mandate born at the very dawn of creation.
Section 4. The prophecy ignored.
Yet, for all their cosmic grandiosity, Bilge Khagan completely understood human nature, and he knew the harsh geopolitical realities of the steppes. In 734 CE, tragedy struck. Bilge Khagan was poisoned, and right before his death, he left a warning. This haunting plea was carved into the stone for all his descendants to see. "The Turkic people, do not cross the Utukan Mountains. If you live there, you will be eternal. If you go south to China, you will die." It was a desperate plea for isolationism, a warning against being lured by the riches, the diplomacy, and the inevitable assimilation or destruction that awaited them in the south. Let's move to this step-by-step breakdown and see how this builds into an almost unbelievable tragedy, because, well, they did exactly what he warned them not to do. Step 1. Bilge Khagan is poisoned in 734. Without his unifying presence, we immediately hit Step 2. The succeeding princes turn on each other. They fight for power and fracture the state all over again. Step 3. A rival Turkic group, the Uyghurs, seize this golden opportunity and ally themselves with Tang China. And finally, Step 4. By 744 CE, barely a decade after Bilge Khagan's death, the Gök Türk Empire is utterly destroyed. They ignored the stones, and they paid the ultimate price. And there is a profound, almost bitter historical irony here. The Uyghurs, who allied with the Chinese to destroy the Gök Turks in 744 CE, essentially just took over the ruling clan's position. But they didn't wipe away the culture. Actually, the Uyghurs adopted the exact same Orkhon runic script. Think about that. The very letters used to carve the warnings that the Gök Turks ignored were preserved by the exact people who destroyed them.
Section 5. The enduring Turkic legacy.
So the physical empire of the Gök Turks was swept away. Their Khagans were dead, their cities left in ruins. But why does this ancient history matter to us today? Well, because the cultural legacy survived the physical destruction. So the crucial point is that this was far more than just a failed ancient state. Those stone warnings were so powerful that they were actually copied and revered by later Khaganates, the Kyrgyz, the Karakhanids, and eventually even the early Ottomans. Furthermore, that word, Turk, the political identity they forged out of absolute nothingness, survived. It evolved into a massive language family spoken by millions across the globe today, ultimately culminating in the foundation of the modern Republic of Turkey in 1923. The first Turkic empire rose from the steppes, touched the sky, and completely collapsed under the weight of its own internal divisions. Their stones still stand on the plains of Mongolia right now, whispering a warning to anyone who will listen. And it leaves every state that has followed in their footsteps haunted by one really provocative question: will we be the next Gök Türk? Thank you so much for exploring this with us today. Definitely think about that warning the next time you look at the rise and fall of modern empires.